The sound was the first thing that hit me, a high-pitch, mechanical scream that ripped through the peaceful afternoon quiet of my neighborhood. It was the sound of a chainsaw biting into living wood, followed by the deeper guttural roar of a wood chipper. A cold, sick feeling washed over me. I had only been gone for the day, a short, unavoidable business trip into the city. But in that time, something had gone terribly, terribly wrong. I rounded the corner onto my street, and my heart stopped. In front of my house was a landscaping truck, the kind used by commercial crews, and a massive wood chipper was spewing a plume of green mulch into its container. Two men with chainsaws were working their way down the property line, and between them and me were my beautiful, dense, 10-foot-tall privacy hedge had stood for 50 years. There was now just empty space, a gaping, ugly wound of raw earth and tree stumps. And standing on the edge of my lawn, clipboard in hand, supervising the massacre with a smug, satisfied smile on her face was Brenda, the president of our Homeowners Association. She saw my car and gave me a cheerful little wave, as if she were hosting a garden party. I stumbled out of my car, my legs unsteady. The sense of violation was so profound, it was physical. My sanctuary, my private green-walled garden, was gone. It was just an open, exposed yard, naked to the street and to her prying eyes. She had done it. She had finally won. And that's when everything went wrong. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment. What would you do if this happened to you? And subscribe to HOA Files. To understand why a man would feel this way about a row of shrubs, you have to understand my life, and you have to understand those hedges. My name is Mark. I'm an accountant, a man who spends his days in the quiet, orderly world of spreadsheets. In tax codes, I work from home. I value my peace. I cherish my privacy. When my wife and I bought our house in the Lakeside Vistas community 15 years ago, we didn't just buy a house. We bought a sanctuary. The defining feature of the property, the thing that made us fall in love with it, was the hedge. It was a magnificent 50-year-old wall of ficus, planted by the original owners. It was over 100 feet long and had been cared for and sculpted over the decades into a dense, impenetrable, 10-foot-tall screen of glossy green leaves. It ran the entire length of our side yard, separating our property from our neighbor and from the street that curved around the corner. Our backyard wasn't just a yard. It was a private, secluded courtyard, a secret garden where we could read and relax and feel completely cut off from the rest of the world. It was the soul of our home. After my wife passed away a few years ago, that garden, that sanctuary, became even more important. It was my place of peace, my refuge from the grief. I spent countless hours out there, caring for the plants, listening to the birds, and maintaining the beautiful green walls that my wife had loved so much. And then Brenda was elected president of the HOA. Our house was on a corner lot. Next to us was Brenda's house. Beyond our house, visible from Brenda's second-story balcony, if one were to look diagonally across my private property, was a sliver of the community lake. My 10-foot-tall privacy hedge, which had been there since before Brenda was born, was in her mind an obstruction. It was blocking her right to a view she had never owned and was not entitled to. Her first visit was a masterclass in passive aggression. She came over with a plate of store-bought cookies and a sickly sweet smile. "Mark," she said, her eyes already scanning over my shoulder, past me, towards the hedge. "I am so thrilled to be the new president. I'm working on a community-wide beautification initiative, and I've identified a few key areas for improvement. Your hedge. It's a little bit of an issue." "My hedge?" I asked, confused. "Yes," she said, her smile tightening. "Completely blocks the view corridor to the lake from my property. It's a shame to have such a wonderful community asset hidden away by that overgrown wall of weeds. I was hoping you'd be a good neighbor and trim it down to a more reasonable height. Say 4 feet?" 4 feet? She wanted me to cut down more than half of my beautiful living fence. "I'm sorry, Brenda," I said politely, but firmly. "Hedge is for privacy. It's the main reason we bought this house. It's staying as it is." The smile vanished from her face. It was as if I had flipped a switch. "I see," she said, her voice turning to ice. I'd hoped we could be reasonable about this. She took her plate of cookies back and marched off. I had failed my first and only loyalty test. I had chosen my privacy over her view. A week later, the official war began. The first notice appeared in my mailbox. Violation of bylaw 12.7, fences, hedges, and other visual obstructions. It stated, in cold bureaucratic language, that any hedge or fence exceeding a height of 6 feet was in direct violation of the community covenants. I was being ordered to cut my hedges down by 4 feet within 30 days, or face daily fines. Pulled out the thick, dusty binder of HOA covenants that we'd received when we bought the house. I flipped to bylaw 12.7, it said, clear as day, that hedges could not exceed 10 feet. 10 feet? My hedge was perfectly compliant. I was about to write a smug letter back to her when I noticed the date on the front of my binder, 2005. On a hunch. I went to the HOA's website and downloaded the current, updated bylaws. And there it was. Bylaw 12.7 had been amended at the last board meeting just 3 weeks ago. The height limit had been changed from 10 feet to 6. Just found a rule to use against me. She had manufactured one. This was no longer a disagreement. This was a targeted, premeditated attack. I decided to fight. I went to the next HOA meeting, armed with photos of my house from the original real estate listing 15 years ago, showing the hedge at its full height, made a calm, logical argument about the hedge being grandfathered in, that it existed long before her vindictive new rule. It was a kangaroo court. Brenda, sitting at the head of the table like a queen, listened with a look of bored indulgence. She had stacked the board with her friends. She presented her own slideshow of photos, taken from her balcony, showing the sliver of blue lake that was tantalizingly out of reach. She spoke of shared community assets, the importance of view corridors for property values, and the uncooperative nature of certain residents who refused to be team players. The board voted unanimously to deny my appeal. The daily fines would begin in 2 weeks. I walked out of that clubhouse into the night air, my heart pounding with a feeling of helpless rage. I was being bullied, legally and officially, by my entire neighborhood. The fine notices started arriving like clockwork. $50 a day. Every day, another white envelope in my mailbox, another reminder of the siege I was under. I hired a lawyer, a man who specialized in these absurd HOA disputes. He was optimistic, but realistic. We can definitely fight. This on the grounds of a pre-existing condition and targeted rulemaking, he said, but it's not a slam dunk, and it will be expensive. The HOA will use the residents' money to drag this out for as long as possible. While my lawyer began drafting legal challenges, Brenda escalated her personal campaign of harassment. She started leaving little, unsigned, passive-aggressive notes on my front door. Your jungle is becoming a fire hazard and is attracting rats. Just a friendly warning from a concerned neighbor. I'd see her walking her poodle on my side of the street, letting it relieve itself on my lawn without picking it up. It was a constant psychological assault designed to wear me down. Then came the chemical attack. I went out one morning to find a long 10-foot section of my beautiful hedge, the part directly in her line of sight to the lake, turning a sickly chemical yellow. The leaves were wilting, the branches drooping. I knelt down and could smell the faint, acrid odor of a powerful herbicide. Someone had come in the night and poisoned my hedge. I had no proof it was her, of course, no cameras, just a deep, sick certainty in the pit of my stomach. This was a new level of viciousness. This was no longer just about a view. This was about winning at any cost. My lawyer, now genuinely furious on my behalf, immediately filed for a temporary restraining order against the HOA and Brenda personally, demanding they cease all contact, stop the fines, and refrain from setting foot on my property while we litigated the grandfathering issue. I felt a glimmer of hope. The law was finally stepping in on my side. The day after the HOA was officially served with the trial papers, I had to go out of town. It was a short one-day trip for a major tax client that I absolutely could not miss. I left early in the morning, feeling a sense of unease but confident that the legal order would protect my property while I was gone. I was wrong. She must have seen it as her last desperate chance to act before the courts could stop her. She saw my absence as an opportunity, and she took it. And that brings us back to that horrible afternoon. Me, standing in the street, staring at the wreckage of my beautiful hedge. Brenda, standing on my lawn, clipboard in hand, looking like a conquering hero. The landscaping crew was just finishing up, loading the last of the stumps into the wood. Chipper, I walked toward her, my legs feeling like lead, a roaring in my ears. "What have you done?" I asked, my voice a hoarse whisper. "I've abated the nuisance," she said, her voice cheerful and proud. She handed me a piece of paper. It was a letter from the HOA's lawyer. It was a masterpiece of legal fiction, claiming that because the hedge was now dying and presenting a fire hazard, a condition she had caused, the board had held an emergency vote to exercise its right to abate the nuisance for the health and safety of the community. It ended with a note that a bill for the removal service, a staggering $3,000, would be forthcoming. I looked at the letter. I looked at the pile of mulch that used to be my sanctuary, and I looked at her smug, triumphant face. In that moment, something inside me broke. The grief, the stress, the constant, grinding harassment hit, all collapsed into a single, cold, hard point of pure, unadulterated rage. She had won. She had destroyed my privacy. She had destroyed the soul of my home, and she had done it with a smile on her face. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat in my living room, the curtains open, feeling the naked, exposed vulnerability of my home. Every passing car's headlights swept across my walls. I could see directly into my neighbors' windows, and they could see directly into mine. The magic was gone. I felt a profound, crushing sense of defeat. She had beaten me. She had used the rules, her money, and her sheer relentless malice to get exactly what she wanted. I thought about selling the house, about just running away from it all, but as the first gray light of dawn began to creep into the room, something else began to burn through the despair. It was the cold, quiet fury of a methodical man who had been pushed too far. She had used the rules to destroy me. Fine. I would use the rules to bury her. Fueled by a pot of black coffee so strong it felt like electricity, I pulled out the thick, unreadable 300-page binder of the lakeside vistas, covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The weapon she had used against me. I was an accountant, spent my life finding patterns and loopholes in dense arcane documents. This was my battlefield. I read every single word, read every subsection, every appendix, every definition. For hours, I read. And then, in a section completely separate from the one she had used against me, I found it. A single, beautiful, glorious paragraph, by Law 12.7. The one she had amended and used to kill my hedge was incredibly specific about fences and hedges. Fences could only be wood or ornamental iron, and no taller than 6 feet. Hedges, as she had so helpfully rewritten, were limited to 6 feet. But then, I found Bylaw 17.2, under the section titled Architectural Structures and Improvements. This section was older, written by the original developers, and it was clear that no one, least of all Brenda, had paid any attention to it in years. It was a section about patios, gazebos, and other structures. And tucked away in it was a subsection about privacy screens, retaining walls, and other masonry structures. And it said, in clear, unambiguous language, that such structures were permitted, provided they were constructed of board-approved materials. It went on to state that these structures could be built up to the maximum height allowed by city building code, and the list of approved materials included painted or stucco-finished cinder block. I felt a jolt, as if I'd touched a live wire. I immediately went to the city's website, looked up the building code for residential walls, and there it was. Maximum height for a non-load-bearing masonry wall, 10 feet. The plan began to form in my mind. Beautiful, terrible, and perfectly maliciously compliant masterpiece. The next morning, I started making calls. I called the best masonry contractor in the city, filed for a permit at the city planning office for the construction of a 10-foot tall, 1-100-and-50-foot-long residential privacy wall. Everything was by the book. The plans were approved within a week, the day the first flatbed truck arrived. Loaded with pallets of gray, ugly, industrial-grade cinder blocks, was a day I will cherish for the rest of my life. The truck rumbled down the street and Brenda was out of her house in a flash, a look of pure, sputtering rage on her face. "What is this?" she shrieked, marching toward the construction crew as they began to unload. "What do you think you're doing? You cannot build a wall here. It's a violation." I had been waiting for this moment. I calmly walked out of my house holding 2 pieces of paper. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice filled with a calm, serene joy. "Just doing a little home improvement project. This is a monstrosity. I will have it stopped. It violates the bylaws." "Actually, it doesn't," I said, and handed her the first piece of paper. It was a copy of the HOA's own bylaw, with the section on masonry privacy screens highlighted in bright yellow. Then I handed her the second piece of paper. It was my freshly approved city building permit. "I'm building a wall, Brenda," I said, a slow smile spreading across my face, a privacy screen to be exact. "As you can see from your own rules, it is a board-approved architectural structure. It's made of a board-approved material cinder block. And per the rules, it's being built to the maximum height allowed by the city, which is a glorious 10 feet. I'm even going to have it painted in a lovely HOA-approved shade of beige. When it's done, just like the rules say," her face went through a spectacular series of transformations. First, confusion as she read her own bylaw. Then, a dawning, horrified comprehension as she looked at the city permit. And finally, a look of pure apocalyptic despair as she looked at the mountain of ugly gray cinder blocks and realized exactly what she had done. She had destroyed my beautiful, green, sound-absorbing hedge, a living thing that still allowed some dappled light and the breeze to pass through. And in its place, as a direct result of her own actions, she was getting a solid, brutalist, 10-foot-tall concrete monolith, a permanent monument to her own spite, a wall that would cast her precious Lakeview yard, the view she had started this whole war to protect, into a permanent, gloomy shadow every single afternoon for the rest of her life. And the most beautiful part, it was 100% her fault. And it was 100% compliant with her own stupid rules. There wasn't a single thing she could do to stop it. The wall went up. It took the crew 2 weeks, and every day I would watch from my window as my new fortress of solitude rose from the ground. It was even uglier and more oppressive than I had imagined. It was magnificent. My backyard was now a completely private, albeit slightly bunker-like courtyard. Her yard, once a sun-drenched showcase, was now a dark, gloomy canyon. The story of what the neighbors quickly dubbed the Great Wall of Brenda became a legend in the community. She became a laughingstock, the woman whose obsession with a view had led her to create a permanent, hideous obstruction that she was now forced to stare at every single day. This whole miserable affair taught me a vital lesson. Be careful what you wish for, and be very, very careful about the rules you try to enforce on others, because you might just be building the walls of your own prison. Brenda destroyed something beautiful out of spite, and in doing so, she only managed to create something far uglier, a constant daily reminder of her own spectacular failure. She got her way. It absolutely ruined her life. Brenda and her husband put their house on the market last week, apparently. Perpetual deep shade and a stunning view of a correctional facility-style wall isn't a huge selling point. The new HOA president just submitted a proposal to the board to officially amend Bylaw 17.2.